Well, I've already told a little bit about going to the junior high, but I should talk a little bit about the daily life in Brynford Park. When we first moved out there, it was such a new neighborhood. The streets weren't even paved, and there were sunflowers growing out in front of our house on the street. And we had no trees, and my mother found some place where she could get trees, and she carried them on the streetcar and planted these two tree of heaven it was called, but they were sumac trees, I guess, two of them in front of the house. So that was what we had in Parkway. And behind the house was an alley, and that's where the peddler would come. And every couple of times a week, this man would come down the alley in a wagon and bring fresh vegetables and fruits and so forth. And he'd come to each of the houses to see what they wanted. And that's where my mother got all the fresh fruits and vegetables. And then the other person that came down the alley was the iceman. And we didn't have any electric refrigerators. We had what we called an ice box. And in the top of this big piece of furniture, there was a hole that was big enough for a piece of ice to sit. And that would cool the bottom part of this big piece of furniture in the kitchen. And my mother would have to put a card in the window, and she had a card, a square piece of cardboard, and one at the top it said 25, and then on the side it said 50, and at the bottom it said 100. And you turned the card to tell how many pounds of ice you wanted, and the peddler in the alley could spot that card. And then he'd come carrying this big piece of ice according to the number of pounds that you'd indicated on his shoulder. And he'd have a piece of leather on his shoulder to keep himself from being soaked. And the minute my mother saw him coming, there was a scurry in the kitchen to lay newspaper down on the floor because she didn't want the dripping on her clean kitchen floor. So that's what we had for many, many years. And up above the refrigerator was what we called a väggbodad. That's what you call it in Swedish. It was a wall hanging. Someone had made this, and it said in the Swedish, Morgonstund har guld i mun. The morning hour has gold in its mouth. And that little saying sat over the refrigerator all the time in our kitchen. And there too, in the wall was the ironing board. And you opened a door and you pull the ironing board down, and you could stand and do your ironing. And then also
what was the iron like?
Well, it's like the irons. Electric irons like we have now, yeah. And then also in front of the ironing board was a sewing machine, so you had to push that aside when you were going to iron. But on the sewing machine sat the radio. And when my mother ironed, she'd be listening to the radio, and it was all these soap operas, so that you could be entertained while you had to stand there hours at end doing the ironing. And of course, nothing was, you couldn't we didn't have any dryer, and we didn't even have a washing machine to begin with. My mother stood and scrubbed everything on a scrub board, and she had this big copper kettle that she heated with hot water, and you boiled the clothes in there. And then after you had washed them, you had to put them through the wringer. You had tubs in the basement, 2 tubs, and one was the soap suds and one was the rinse water. And then you dumped out the soap water and put more rinse water in. You rinsed the clothes 3 times.
Wow.
In the meantime, you put them through the wringer each time. It was so much work. I don't know how my mother did it. And no dryer, of course. So in the wintertime, you hung it on clotheslines in the basement. In the summertime, you hung the clothes outside.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, doing housework was not an easy job.
She did have a vacuum cleaner.
She did have a vacuum. She had a carpet sweeper and a vacuum cleaner. And then, of course, she was down on her hands and knees to scrub the floors. And, of course, you scrubbed the back porch and you scrubbed the front porch. It was an awful lot of work. And
I can still remember the smell of the pantry.
And we had a pantry off the kitchen. We didn't have any cupboards in the kitchen. We just had this big room that we called the pantry. And of course, you kids loved that pantry because there were a lot of good things in there, including the Holland soft. Remember that? It was a what do you?
It's a, right, it's a
You,
sweet syrup.
a syrup that you put in a glass and you added water to that, and you had a wonderful summer drink.
That's right. Now you had was there a rag picker who came?
Oh yeah, rags and iron, I thought that he would say. Rags and old iron. They would come down the alley also, picking up trash of that sort of stuff. So all of these things happened in the alley.
Right, in the alley, I remember.
And if you were going any place, you took the bus or you took the streetcar.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a lot of dental work done as a youngster. But the dentist was way down in the loop, and it took a whole hour to get down there. And we had to take, because it was 3 cents cheaper, we took the streetcar.
Incredible.
It was 7 cents on the streetcar and 10 cents on the elevated train. But to get to the elevated train, you had to take 2 streetcars before you got to the elevated train. So.
And the streetcars had the electric wires over the top.
And that's where we really got a good picture of the Depression.
Because. And I'm going to stop right there.
All right.
Pick that up.